There are phone calls that change everything. Not the ones you expect. Not the ones you have been bracing for. The ones that come on an ordinary Tuesday morning when you are 7,000 miles from home and your daughter is 6 years old and you have been counting days on a calendar taped to the wall above your bunk since the moment you landed. This call came at 4:47 a.m. local time. Fort Campbell, Kentucky was 9 hours behind me. My daughter Emma was asleep in her bed on Sycamore Lane. Or she was supposed to be. The woman on the phone said, "Sergeant Morrow, my name is Linda Hayes. I am a caseworker with the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. I am calling regarding Emma Grace Morrow, age 6. We received a report 3 days ago alleging abandonment and neglect. A petition for emergency foster placement was filed this morning by a family member." I sat up on my bunk in the dark. I said, "What family member?" She said, "The petition was filed by a Ms. Diane Morrow. She listed herself as the child's aunt. Diane was my stepsister. We had the same father. Different mothers. 15 years of a relationship that had always been exactly what it looked like on the surface. 2 women who shared a last name and a father and very little else." I said, "Ms. Hayes, I am currently deployed. I am a staff sergeant in the United States Army. I have been in theater for 6 weeks. My daughter is in the care of my neighbor Mrs. Patricia Coleman on Sycamore Lane. She has documentation. She has power of attorney. Everything is in order." Linda Hayes was quiet for a moment. She said, "Sergeant Morrow, the petition alleges that your daughter has been left without adequate supervision or legal guardianship. It alleges that the neighbor arrangement is informal and undocumented. It alleges that you did not make proper arrangements before deployment." Every single thing she said was wrong. I had spent 4 months before deployment doing everything right. Legal documents. Notarized power of attorney. A binder on Mrs. Coleman's kitchen counter with Emma's medical records and school information and emergency contacts and every document anyone could possibly need. I had sat with a JAG officer at Fort Campbell for 2 hours going through every scenario. I had done everything right. Diane had told them I had done nothing. I said, "Ms. Hayes, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Power of attorney is notarized and filed with Knox County. Mrs. Coleman has a complete legal packet. Before you take any action, I need you to go to that house and look at the binder on the kitchen counter." She said, "Sergeant Morrow, we are required to investigate all petitions." I said, "I understand that. I am asking you to investigate before you act." She said, "I will note your concerns." She hung up. I sat in the dark 7,000 miles from home and I thought about my 6-year-old daughter asleep on Sycamore Lane. And I thought about Diane. My name is Rachel. Rachel Ann Morrow. I am 38 years old. I have served in the United States Army for 13 years. 2 deployments before this one. A daughter I have raised alone since her father left when Emma was 14 months old. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. My father remarried when I was 11. His new wife Sandra had a daughter 3 years older than me named Diane. We lived in the same house for 4 years until I left for the Army at 19. Those 4 years were not warm. Diane was the kind of person who understood early that other people's vulnerabilities were useful. She had a gift for identifying the exact thing that would hurt you most and finding a way to use it that left no fingerprints. When I was 13, she told my father I had been skipping school. I had not been skipping school. I had been at the library 2 afternoons a week working on a science project that required resources we did not have at home. My father believed her. When I was 16, she told my stepmother I had been seeing a boy my parents had specifically said I could not see. I had not been seeing him. I had been tutoring him in algebra in the school cafeteria because his mother had asked my teacher to help find him a tutor. My stepmother believed her. There was never a confrontation. Never a moment where Diane declared herself an enemy. It was always smaller than that. A word here. A suggestion there. The particular art of someone who understands that the most effective damage is the kind that looks like concern. I left for the Army at 19 and I had spent 13 years being grateful for the distance. I had been back in Knoxville for 3 years. I had bought the house on Sycamore Lane. I had enrolled Emma in 1st grade at Bearden Elementary. I had built a life that was entirely mine in the particular way that things you build yourself belong to you. Diane had been present at the edges of that life in the way she was always present at the edges of things. Sunday dinners at my father's house 4 times a year. Birthday calls that lasted exactly long enough to be noted. Christmas card every year with a message written in the careful handwriting of someone who wanted a record of their own thoughtfulness. I had not trusted her. But I had not expected this. I sat in the dark 7,000 miles from home and I made 3 calls before the sun came up. The first was to Mrs. Patricia Coleman on Sycamore Lane, who answered on the second ring at 7:52 p.m. Knoxville time and told me Emma was asleep and safe and the binder was exactly where it was supposed to be. The second was to my JAG officer at Fort Campbell. The third was to a woman named Major Webb. Major Webb was my commanding officer's legal liaison. 44 years old. 20 years in the Army JAG Corps. The kind of woman who had seen every variation of every legal problem a deployed soldier could face and had developed the particular combination of speed and precision that comes from never having the luxury of time. She answered at 5:23 a.m. my time. I told her everything. She was quiet for 11 seconds. Then she said, "Morrow, do you have your deployment orders with you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "The full packet. Pentagon stamp and all." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Good. Send me everything in the next 20 minutes. I will make a call." I said, "Who are you calling?" She said, "Linda Hayes at Tennessee DCS. And then I am calling Diane Morrow's attorney if she has one. And if she does not have one yet, she is about to need one." She hung up. I sent everything in 14 minutes. Then I sat on my bunk in the dark and I looked at the calendar on the wall above me. Emma's drawings filled the squares. She had decorated every day with something. A flower. A sun. A dog that looked like a cloud with legs. Each square a day I was getting through to get back to her. 43 days marked off. 89 to go. I put my hand on the calendar. I said, "I am coming, baby. Nobody is taking you anywhere." Major Webb called me back at 7:41 a.m. my time. 14 minutes after Linda Hayes at Tennessee DCS had opened her email and read the deployment orders I had sent through Webb's office. Pentagon stamp. Commanding officer signature. Fort Campbell letterhead. Every document that proved beyond any possible ambiguity that Staff Sergeant Rachel Morrow had not abandoned her daughter. She had deployed in service of her country with complete legal arrangements in place and a notarized power of attorney filed with Knox County and a binder on her neighbor's kitchen counter that contained more documentation than most custody arrangements ever see. Webb said, "Morrow, the DCS investigation has been suspended pending review of the documentation. Emma is staying with Mrs. Coleman. Nobody is going anywhere." The relief of that landed somewhere so deep I had to sit down. I said, "And Diane?" Webb's voice shifted slightly. The particular shift of someone who has found something and is deciding how to deliver it. She said, "Morrow, I need to tell you what your stepsister actually filed." She had not simply called DCS with concerns. She had submitted a formal written petition. 4 pages. Signed. With a notary stamp. Petition alleged that I had deployed without making legal arrangements for Emma. That Emma had been left in the informal care of a neighbor with no documentation. That the neighbor was elderly and not capable of adequate supervision. That Emma had missed 3 days of school in the past month. That Emma had expressed distress to Diane directly about her living situation. Every statement was fabricated. Mrs. Coleman was 61 years old and had been a licensed foster parent for 14 years before she retired and was one of the most capable people I had ever met in my life. Emma had missed 1 day of school in the past month with a documented stomach virus. Emma had not spoken to Diane in 4 months because I had limited contact after an incident the previous Christmas that I will get to. Webb said, "The notary stamp on the petition is from a notary on Kingston Pike in Knoxville. We are looking at whether the statements made in the petition constitute fraud. Filing false statements with a state agency is a Class A misdemeanor in Tennessee. If the statements were made knowingly and intentionally, it becomes something more serious." I said, "They were made knowingly. Every single one." Webb said, "I believe you. I need you to send me everything you have. Any documentation of your prior arrangements, Mrs. Coleman's credentials, Emma's school records, and anything related to whatever happened at Christmas." I spent the next 4 hours sending everything. The power of attorney. The notarized guardianship arrangement. Mrs. Coleman's foster care certification, even though it was retired because it spoke to her character and capability. Emma's school attendance records showing 1 absence. Every document in the binder on Mrs. Coleman's kitchen counter photographed and sent. And then I wrote 3 pages about Christmas. December 23rd of the previous year. My father's house on Sequoia Hills Drive. The annual family dinner. 14 people around a table including Diane and her husband Greg and their 2 teenagers. After dinner, while the adults were in the living room, Diane had taken Emma to the back bedroom. I had noticed after 12 minutes. I had gone to find them. I stood in the hallway outside the bedroom door and I heard Diane's voice. She was telling Emma that mommies who go away to war do not always come home. She was telling a 6-year-old that her mother might not come back. Emma was crying. I opened that door. What happened in the next 4 minutes I will not fully reconstruct here because some things belong to me and Emma and the closed door of that bedroom and nobody else. What I will tell you is that I picked Emma up and I carried her out of that house and I put her in my car and I drove home. I had not spoken to Diane since. I had not told my father what happened because my father was 71 years old and had a heart condition, and I had made the calculation that protecting him from this information was more important than the satisfaction of telling him. I had told no one except Mrs. Coleman, who had held Emma while I sat at her kitchen table at 11 p.m. on December 23rd, and understood with complete clarity that Diane had declared something that evening that I needed to take seriously. I had taken it seriously. I had spent the 4 months between Christmas and deployment building the most complete legal protection for Emma that a JAG officer and I could construct together. I had not built it quite completely enough. 'Cause I had not imagined that Diane would file a false petition with a notary stamp. That was my miscalculation. I had known she was capable of damage. I had not known she was capable of that particular kind. Webb read my 3 pages about Christmas. She called me back at 2:17 a.m. my time. I had not slept. She said, "Morrow, I want you to know something. What your stepsister did in that bedroom on December 23rd and what she filed with DCS 3 days ago are part of the same thing. One was the opening. This was the next move." I said, "I know." She said, "Here is what I need you to understand. You have done everything right. The documentation is complete. Emma is safe. The DCS investigation is suspended. But Diane filed a false petition with a notary stamp, and that has consequences independent of Emma's situation." She said, "The Tennessee AG's office has a military family protection unit. I have a contact there. I am going to make a referral today." She paused. She said, "And Morrow, I want to ask you something." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Does your stepsister understand what a Pentagon stamped deployment order actually is? Does she understand what it means legally to file false statements against an active duty service member?" I thought about Diane. 15 years of small, carefully placed damage. Words that left no fingerprints. Suggestions that looked like concern. I said, "I think she understood enough to know it would cause problems. I do not think she understood enough to know what she was actually setting in motion." Webb said, "That is what I thought." She said, "She is about to find out." I sat in the dark 7,000 miles from home. Inside the base, the night was doing what nights do in that part of the world. Hot even at 2 a.m. The particular sounds of a place that does not fully sleep. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Emma's drawings. Flowers. Suns. Cloud dog. 43 days marked off. 89 to go. I took a pencil from the shelf above my bunk. I drew a small star on day 44. Not because anything was finished. 'Cause something had started. And I needed to mark the moment it started. Linda Hayes from Tennessee DCS called Mrs. Coleman at 9:15 a.m. Knoxville time. Mrs. Coleman told me about it that evening when I called to check on Emma. She said, "Rachel, that woman called," and I answered, and before she could say anything I told her to come to the house. I said, "Come look at this binder before you say another word to me." Linda Hayes came at 11 a.m. Mrs. Coleman put the binder on the kitchen table and opened it to the first page. The power of attorney. Notarized. Knox County filing stamp. Date and signature of the JAG officer who had reviewed it. Linda Hayes read for 4 minutes without speaking. Then she turned to the guardianship arrangement, the medical authorization, the school contact documentation, Emma's pediatrician information, emergency protocols, Mrs. Coleman's identification and contact information in 3 separate places, 14 tabs, every one labeled, every document current and signed and filed correctly. Mrs. Coleman said. She closed that binder and she looked at me and she said, "Mrs. Coleman, I apologize for the intrusion." And she left. I said, "How is Emma?" She said, "Emma ate 2 bowls of cereal this morning and told me her cloud dog needed a name and we spent 40 minutes deciding on Gerald." I laughed for the first time in 36 hours. Mrs. Coleman said, "Rachel, she is fine. Gerald is fine. You focus on what you need to focus on." I focused. Major Webb's referral to the Tennessee AG's Military Family Protection Unit moved faster than I had expected. The unit was staffed by 2 attorneys and an investigator whose entire function was exactly this: false statements against deployed service members, fraudulent custody or guardianship interference, the particular category of harm that targets people who cannot be present to defend themselves. They had seen it before. Not often, but enough to have a process. The investigator's name was James Okafor. He called me at 6 a.m. my time on a Thursday. Professional. Direct. He had already reviewed everything Webb had sent. He said, "Sergeant Morrow, I want to walk you through what we have found." The petition Diane had filed contained 6 factual statements. All 6 were false. The notary stamp was real. She had signed it in front of a legitimate notary on Kingston Pike, which meant the false statements had been made knowingly and under oath. Knowingly and under oath. James Okafor said those words with the particular weight of a man who understood exactly what they meant in a legal context. He said, "Filing false statements with a state agency under oath is a Class A misdemeanor." However, given that the target of those statements was an active duty service member and the statements were designed to interfere with the legal guardianship arrangement of a military dependent, he paused. "We are looking at Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 1038, false information and hoaxes affecting military operations. That is a federal charge." I sat on my bunk. I said, "What happens now?" He said, "We are going to contact your stepsister. We will inform her of the charges being considered and give her the opportunity to cooperate." In our experience, people in her situation fall into 2 categories: those who understand immediately what they have done and those who do not understand until it is in front of a federal judge. He said, "Based on what I have read, I believe your stepsister understood exactly what she was doing when she filed that petition. What she did not understand was the full legal architecture around an active duty service member and their dependents." He said, "She is about to understand it very clearly." James Okafor called Diane on a Friday morning at 10:30 a.m. Knoxville time. I was not on that call. I found out what happened on it from Webb, who found out from Okafor. Diane answered. Okafor identified himself. Tennessee Attorney General's Office. Military Family Protection Unit. He said, "Ms. Morrow, I am calling regarding a petition you filed with the Tennessee Department of Children's Services on." He gave the date. He said, "That petition contains statements regarding Staff Sergeant Rachel and Morrow currently deployed in service of the United States Army. I need to inform you that those statements have been reviewed and found to be factually incorrect. I also need to inform you that filing false statements with a state agency under oath is a criminal matter, and that given the military status of the person named in the petition, we are also examining federal statutes." Okafor said Diane was silent for 11 seconds. Then she said, "I was concerned about my niece." He said, "Ms. Morrow, your niece has a notarized power of attorney filed with Knox County, a complete legal guardianship arrangement and documentation that has been reviewed and found entirely in order by the Department of Children's Services. The statements in your petition that these arrangements did not exist were false. You signed those statements in front of a notary." Another silence. She said, "I think I need to speak with an attorney." He said, "That would be advisable. I will give you 72 hours before I follow up." He hung up. Diane called an attorney within the hour. I know because the attorney called Webb's office that same afternoon. The attorney's name was Gerald Pierce, office in downtown Knoxville. He was professional and direct, and he said, My client understands the gravity of the situation and wishes to discuss cooperation. Webb called me that evening. She said, Morrow, your stepsister's attorney has reached out. She wants to cooperate. I said, what does cooperation look like? Webb said, full written retraction of every statement in the petition. Signed. Notarized. Filed with DCS. A formal letter of apology to Mrs. Coleman. Agreement to have no contact with Emma without your explicit written consent for a period to be determined. And a civil settlement to cover legal costs. She said, in exchange the AG's office would consider the matter resolved without criminal charges. I sat with that for a long time. 7,000 miles from home. Day 51 on the calendar. Emma's drawings on every square. Gerald the cloud dog. I said, Webb, what would you do? She said, I would take the cooperation. Not for Diane. For Emma. A criminal trial means Emma's name in documents and proceedings for the next 2 years. Cooperation closes it. Diane pays the cost. Emma moves forward. I said, and if she does something like this again? Webb said, the retraction and the agreement are on record. If she violates any term, the full criminal referral goes forward immediately. She knows that. Her attorney knows that. She said, Morrow, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone fully understand what they were capable of and what it almost cost them, without making them a martyr in their own story. I thought about that for a long time. Then I said, yes. Take the cooperation. If you have ever had to make a decision not for yourself, but for someone you love who needed you to be the bigger person, drop a comment right now. Tell me what time it is where you are. Tell me if you would have done the same. 'Cause I want to know who is listening tonight. The cooperation agreement was signed on a Tuesday morning. I was not there. I was 7,000 miles away on day 53 of 89. Webb sent me the signed documents at 3:14 a.m. my time. I read them on my phone in the dark with the calendar on the wall above me and Emma's drawings in every square. Full retraction. Notarized. Filed with DCS. Formal written apology to Mrs. Coleman. 3 paragraphs. Signed. No contact with Emma without my explicit written consent for 2 years. Civil settlement covering legal costs $4,200. Paid directly to the account Webb specified. Every line of it exactly what had been agreed. I read the retraction twice. Diane had written, the statements made in my petition dated she listed the date were factually incorrect. The legal arrangements made by Staff Sergeant Rachel and Morrow prior to deployment were complete, properly documented, and fully in order. I retract each statement in that petition in its entirety and acknowledge that the petition should not have been filed. I put my phone down. I looked at the calendar. 38 days left. I put my pencil to day 53 and I drew a small star. The same star I had drawn on day 44 when something had started. This one meant something different. This one meant it was finished. The last 38 days passed the way the last stretch of anything long passes. Not quickly, but with a different quality of time than the days before. You can feel the end coming. Changes the weight of each individual day. Makes them simultaneously longer and more bearable. Mrs. Coleman sent me a photograph every evening at 7 p.m. Knoxville time, which was 4 a.m. my time, and I had set my phone to ring for her specifically so I would not miss it. Emma at dinner. Emma at school. Emma in the backyard with a stick she had decided was a magic wand. Emma asleep with her arm around a stuffed elephant named Clarence that she had owned since she was 2. Gerald the cloud dog had been named in a drawing that arrived via email. Mrs. Coleman had scanned it and sent it. Gerald had large ears and what appeared to be a smile and was labeled in Emma's careful first-grade handwriting with every letter the correct size except the G, which was enormous. I taped Gerald to the wall next to the calendar. On day 71, Emma called me on video for the first time since I had deployed. Mrs. Coleman had set it up on her iPad. Emma's face appeared on my screen at 4:30 a.m. my time. 6 years old. Her hair in 2 uneven braids that she had clearly done herself. My grandmother's stubbornness in her chin. My mother's eyes. She said, Mommy. I said, hey baby. She held up the drawing of Gerald. She said, this is Gerald. He is a cloud dog. Mrs. Coleman says he is very realistic. I said, he is extremely realistic. Those ears are perfect. She said, I know. She showed me her bedroom. Her school backpack hanging on the hook by the door. A drawing she had made at school of what appeared to be our house on Sycamore Lane with a figure standing in front of it that she said was me. The figure was taller than the house. I did not mention that. She said, Mommy, how many more days? I looked at the calendar. I said, 18 more days, baby. She counted on her fingers. She ran out of fingers. She looked at her hands like they had failed her. She said, that is a lot of fingers. I said, it is. But I am going to use up every single one of them and then I am going to be home. She said, okay. She showed me Clarence the elephant. She said, Clarence says hi. I said, tell Clarence I said hi back. She pressed Clarence's face against the screen for 3 seconds. Then she said, Mommy, Aunt Diane called Mrs. Coleman. Mrs. Coleman said she could not talk to her. Is Aunt Diane in trouble? I looked at my daughter on the screen. 6 years old with uneven braids and my mother's eyes and a stuffed elephant named Clarence. I said, Aunt Diane made a mistake, baby. She is working on fixing it. Emma considered that. She said, okay. Mrs. Coleman made macaroni and cheese for dinner. The real kind. Not the box. I said, that sounds amazing. She said it was. I had 2 bowls. Gerald had some too, but he is a cloud dog, so he did not actually eat it. I said, that makes sense. We talked for 22 minutes. When Mrs. Coleman gently indicated it was Emma's bedtime, Emma pressed her face against the screen from her side. She said, Mommy, I love you to the moon. I pressed my face against the screen from my side. I said, I love you to the moon and back and all the way around again. She giggled. The screen went dark. I sat in the dark on my bunk. I looked at Gerald on the wall next to the calendar. 18 days. Just 18 more days. I lay back on my bunk and I looked at the ceiling and I felt something I want to name correctly because it deserves the right name. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just solidity. The particular feeling of standing on ground that has been tested and held. Of knowing that everything I had built for Emma before I left had done what it was built to do. The power of attorney. The binder. Mrs. Coleman. Webb. Kafour. Every careful decision made in the 4 months before I deployed. Diane had tested every single piece of it. Every single piece had held. Emma was safe. Gerald was realistic. Clarence said hi. 18 days. Day 89 came on a Thursday morning. Fort Campbell, Kentucky. 6:47 a.m. The particular quality of American morning light that I had been thinking about for 89 days without fully realizing I was thinking about it. I had a bag. My uniform. A small stuffed dog I had bought at a shop near the base 3 weeks before departure because Emma had mentioned once that Gerald needed a friend and I had filed that information away in the particular way that mothers file things their children say. The dog was brown with large ears. I named him on the plane. Harold. 'Cause Gerald needed a friend with a dignified name. Mrs. Coleman brought Emma to Fort Campbell. 4-hour drive from Knoxville. They left at 5 a.m. Mrs. Coleman made sandwiches for the road. Emma wore her good dress. The blue one with the white collar that she had chosen herself from her closet that morning according to Mrs. Coleman's text sent at 5:23 a.m. which I had read somewhere over Tennessee. I saw them before they saw me. Mrs. Coleman standing at the edge of the family welcome area with her hands folded. Emma beside her in the blue dress scanning the crowd with the focused intensity of a 6-year-old who has been told something is about to happen and is determined not to miss it. I walked toward them. Emma saw me. She did not run. She stood completely still for 2 full seconds. Then she ran. She hit me at full speed and I caught her and she wrapped her arms around my neck and her legs around my waist and she was heavier than she had been 89 days ago, the way children are always heavier when you have been away long enough to feel the weight of the growing. She did not say anything. She just held on. I held on too. Mrs. Coleman stood at a respectful distance and looked at something interesting in the middle distance the way people do when they are giving a moment its privacy. After a while Emma leaned back and looked at my face. She said, "You have more freckles." I said it was sunny. She said, "Okay." She looked at my bag. She said, "Did you bring me anything?" I reached into my bag. I took out Harold. She looked at him. She turned him over. She examined his ears. She said, "His ears are like Gerald's." I said, "I know. I thought they might be friends." She held Harold against her chest. She said, "His name is Harold." She said it as a statement, not a question, because she had already decided. I said, "That is a perfect name." She nodded like this was obvious. Then she took my hand and pulled me toward Mrs. Coleman. She said, "Mrs. Coleman, Mommy is back." Mrs. Coleman looked at me. She had driven 4 hours on a Thursday morning because my daughter needed to be here and because Patricia Coleman was the kind of woman who did what needed to be done without being asked and without expecting to be thanked. She said, "Welcome home, Rachel." I said, "Thank you, Patricia, for everything." She waved her hand. She said, "Emma ate all the sandwiches on the way here. I hope you are not hungry." I laughed. Emma was already walking toward the parking lot, pulling me by the hand and telling me about Gerald and Harold's first meeting, which had apparently already occurred in her imagination on the drive from Knoxville, and had involved a significant adventure that she narrated for most of the 4-hour drive home. I listened to every word. I drove us home to Sycamore Lane. Emma fell asleep in her car seat somewhere around Cookville with Harold tucked under her arm and Gerald, who Mrs. Coleman had brought from the house specifically, in her other hand. I drove in the quiet of a sleeping child and a Thursday afternoon in Tennessee and the particular feeling of a road taking you somewhere you have been trying to get back to for 89 days. The house on Sycamore Lane looked exactly as I had left it. Mrs. Coleman had arranged for the lawn to be cut the day before. There were flowers on the porch that had not been there when I left. Yellow ones in a pot by the door. I found out later that Emma had picked them out at the garden center on Kingston Pike 2 days before. She had told Mrs. Coleman they were the color of happy. I carried Emma inside. She did not wake up. I put her in her bed. I put Gerald on one side and Harold on the other. I stood in the doorway of her room for a long time. 6 years old. My grandmother's stubbornness. My mother's eyes. Uneven braids she had done herself. 2 stuffed animals who had apparently already shared one significant adventure and were about to share many more. I had been 7,000 miles away for 89 days. She was exactly as I had left her. Safe. Whole. Entirely herself. Everything I had built before I left had held. Every document. Every notarized signature. Every tabbed section of a binder on a neighbor's kitchen counter. Every call to a JAG officer. Every 3 a.m. conversation with Major Webb. It had all held. I closed Emma's door. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I sat at the table on Sycamore Lane in the particular quiet of a house that has been waiting for you and is glad you are back. I thought about Diane. Not with anger. With something more like clarity. She had looked at my life and seen something she could dismantle. She had been wrong about what it was built of. She had not understood that 13 years in the Army teaches you to prepare for the thing you hope will not happen. That you build your protection before you need it, not because you are afraid but because you understand that the time to build is before, not during. She had not understood any of that. She understood it now. I did not call my father about what Diane had done. I made that decision in the car somewhere around Cookville with Emma asleep in the back seat. He was 71 years old. He had a heart condition. He loved both of us in the imperfect way of a man who had made choices he could not fully account for and had spent 30 years living with the results. I was not going to add this to what he carried. That was my choice. I stand by it. What I did instead was call him on a Friday evening from my kitchen with Emma in the bath. He answered on the second ring. He said, "Rachel, you are home." I said, "I am home, Daddy." He said, "And Emma?" I said, "Emma named a stuffed dog Harold and is currently explaining to him why bath time is not optional." He laughed. His real laugh. The one I had grown up with. The one that had survived 71 years and a heart condition and 2 families and more complicated history than most people carry. He said, "She sounds like you at that age." I said, "I know." We talked for 37 minutes. Not about Diane. About Emma. About the garden he was planning in the spring. About a book he had been reading that he thought I would like. About ordinary things. The best kind of things. The binder still sits on the shelf in my home office on Sycamore Lane. Third shelf from the top. Between a field manual and a photo album Emma made for me last Mother's Day out of construction paper and an alarming amount of glue. I do not take it out. I do not need to. Did what it was built to do. Emma starts second grade in the fall. She has informed me that Gerald and Harold will be attending with her in her backpack because they have been through a lot together and deserve the educational opportunity. I did not argue. Some things you just agree to. Mrs. Coleman comes for dinner every other Sunday. She brings the right bread. Emma always asks for the macaroni. The real kind. Not the box. Major Webb sent a card when I got home. Said Morrow. Standing work under difficult conditions. As always. Webb. I put it on my refrigerator. It is still there. James Okafor from the AG's office sent an email. He said, Sergeant Morrow, it has been a privilege. Your daughter is lucky to have you. So is the Army. I read that email 3 times. Then I printed it. It is in the binder. Third shelf from the top. 'Cause I keep records. 'Cause documentation is how you prove what happened. 'Cause the truth needs somewhere to live and I have always made sure it had one. I did not do it for revenge. I did it because of who I am. Because 13 years in the Army taught me that the time to build is before, not during. 'Cause Emma needed me to get it right and I got it right. 'Cause Gerald needed a friend with a dignified name and Harold was available. Drop a comment right now and tell me what time is it where you are tonight. And tell me, have you ever had to protect someone you love from a distance? When you could not be there and had to trust what you had built to hold? Tell me what that felt like. 'Cause I want to know. If this story moved you, if you felt that 4 a.m. phone call or that video screen or Emma running across that welcome area in her blue dress, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Honor Unveiled. We will see you in the next one.